Imagine you're the parent of a child who got into something on the stove and tragically ended up with burns on a large portion of their midsection. I can imagine that you're rather overwhelmed, but that you would rush your kiddo to the ER. This Capstone project of 2019 aims to provide a pediatric trauma and burn binder resource to families at Swedish Medical Center. Swedish Medical Center is a level 1 trauma hospital in Englewood, Colorado, that is certified for burn and pediatric trauma patients. The pediatric unit is unique because pediatric patients rely on parents and guardians as their primary decision makers, and there is a vast need for communication between hospital staff and caregivers. In terms of intra-hospital communication, pediatric patients are transported quite frequently as they need to undergo procedures and tests and surgeries. These heighten the risk for medical complications, and it requires a lot of communication between units and coordinators around scheduling and medication dosing, etc. A study in Australia found that a lack of adequate social work-led care to gaps in post-discharge follow-up with families. There are considerable post-discharge needs for burn patients. Seriously injured children are at higher risk for physical disabilities that may turn into potentially lifelong disabilities, in addition to psychosocial problems as a result of the injury. So 2 years follow-up is best practice for many of these patients. That same Australian study found that a model that provides coordination of psychosocial care both during the hospitalization and post-discharge would reduce the gap in care for injured children and their families. But in terms of gaps and limitations in the literature, there's little to no formal literature on communication protocol with pediatric patient families, nor is there appropriate discharge resource mechanisms highlighted to ensure that these post-discharge needs are met. In addition, the majority of these were focused on international hospitals, but they were all developed nations that had advanced medical practices. This binder is relevant to social work because it takes a family-centered and systems approach to medical care. It focuses on using interdisciplinary team communication to expand beyond just the initial trauma and crisis, but to also focus on the psychosocial needs beyond the hospital stay. The purpose of the resource is to really support families as they are the primary decision makers and require quality medical updates and information to make the best decisions for their families. This resource would provide critical post-discharge information and resources to not only help them think ahead, but also support them after their discharge from the hospital. In terms of potential and implications, the hope is to alleviate stress on families and prepare them for their post-discharge needs. There is a current financial commitment from the director to carry on the binder resource in the future. It also requires multi-level staff buy-in to continue on using the resource and creating the resource. It's really no use if no one follows up and keeps it current. As for the timeline, it changed some from last fall. I started out with the burn review and then working with my team of the director, the social worker, and the trauma coordinator to discuss what was needed. I then realized I wasn't going to get the buy-in from the trauma physicians, and so I moved forward into February to collect the resources and finalize a draft beta version of the binder. We then worked together through the spring to finalize the product in May. The process included, as I had mentioned, attending the formal burn review that was led by the trauma surgeon of a particular case that didn't go well last year. And then I met with the PICU director, the PICU social worker, and the trauma coordinator. I then used that time to shift and focus purely on creating a resource binder with printouts and support groups, along with some Swedish-specific sections that highlighted our process in particular. And the final product is a multi-tab 3-ring binder with general trauma and burn information and an introduction to Swedish, followed by both physical therapy and occupational resources, recommendations for returning to school, recommendations regarding talking to your child about burn injuries, a glossary of burn and medical terminology, along with 3 amazing groups of resources that were provided by the Phoenix Society, the Model Systems Knowledge Translation Center for Living with Burn Injuries, and the American Burn Association. There also is a pocket in the back that includes some printouts, some handout leaflets, and a printout of just some general references. And finally, in terms of strengths and limitations of this project, I was really upset because there was an inability to garner that commitment from the trauma team. But there was a wide variety of online resources for the pediatric burn patients, in addition to a subset of Spanish resources so that I can provide them to non-English speaking families. And there was amazing, great feedback from the trauma coordinator team, the PICU social worker, and the child and family director, which led me to feel very supportive throughout the process.